The first time American sailors truly realized how dangerous the Japanese Navy was at night, many never lived to describe it. In the darkness around Guadalcanal in 1942, Allied warships vanished beneath sudden explosions and sheets of flame before the crews even knew what was happening. Searchlights turned on, but torpedoes arrived from impossible distances, entire formations dissolved within minutes. To many Allied sailors, it felt almost supernatural. But there was nothing supernatural about it. The Japanese Navy had spent decades preparing for exactly this kind of war. Long before the Second World War began, Japanese naval planners understood a brutal reality. Japan could never match the industrial power of the United States. If war came in the Pacific, the Imperial Japanese Navy would eventually face a larger fleet with more ships, more fuel, and greater production capacity. So Japanese strategists built a doctrine designed to destroy the enemy before that advantage could fully matter. And night combat became central to the plan. The Japanese envisioned a decisive battle somewhere in the Western Pacific. As the American fleet advanced across the ocean toward Asia, submarines, destroyers, and cruisers would weaken it through repeated attacks. Then, under cover of darkness, fast surface forces would strike with torpedoes, just before the battleships moved in to finish the enemy near dawn. Because of this doctrine, the Japanese crews trained relentlessly for fighting at night. And they became extraordinarily good at it. While many Western navies viewed nighttime combat as chaotic and dangerous, the Japanese crews treated it almost like a science. Destroyer squadrons practiced night maneuvers repeatedly, and crews learned to identify silhouettes instantly. Signalmen would communicate it with minimal lighting. Lookouts developed strict night vision discipline. Entire formations rehearsed torpedo attacks in darkness without revealing their position. The Royal Navy still possessed valuable experience from the First World War and from Mediterranean operations early in the conflict. But no major navy before the war devoted as much sustained attention to large-scale night torpedo combat as Japan. The United States Navy faced similar problems. American doctrine still centered heavily around battleships and daylight engagements. Many commanders still relied more on optical spotting than electronics. So coordination between ships at night remained difficult. Training was improving, but it had not yet reached the level of preparation the Japanese had dedicated. Near Guadalcanal, the sea became a nightly bloodbath. The waters around the Solomon Islands became one of the deadliest naval battlegrounds in history. Almost every night, Japanese destroyers raced down a route the Allies called the Tokyo Express, carrying troops and supplies under cover of darkness. To stop them, Allied cruisers and destroyers waited in the black waters around Savo Island, Iron Bottom Sound, and the narrow channels nearby. What followed was a series of brutal nighttime battles, fought at dangerously close range. During the Battle of Savo Island in August 1942, a Japanese cruiser force under Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa slipped past Allied patrols and launched one of the most devastating surprise attacks of the war. In less than an hour, Allied heavy cruisers were destroyed or fatally damaged. Hit by accurate gunfire and deadly torpedoes fired in the darkness. The Japanese spotted the Allied ships first, and their torpedoes struck from a great distance. The result stunned Allied navies across the Pacific. But even more alarming was the weapon responsible for the destruction. The Japanese Type 93 torpedo, later known to the Allies as the Long Lance, was arguably the finest ship-launched torpedo of the war. It possessed extraordinary range, tremendous speed, and a massive warhead. Most importantly, it produced far less visible wake than many Western torpedoes. Allied commanders often did not even realize torpedoes had been fired until explosions ripped through their ships. The weapon transformed Japanese destroyers into terrifying night predators. Japanese destroyer squadrons could launch torpedo spreads from beyond ranges many Allied officers believed possible. Minutes later, ships would erupt into fireballs seemingly without warning. Throughout late 1942, the pattern repeated itself. At Tassafaronga, an American cruiser force initially achieved surprise using radar-guided fire control. But confusion during the engagement allowed Japanese destroyers to launch long-lance torpedoes before withdrawing. The result became another disaster for the Americans. American sailors began to understand something painful. Technology alone was not enough. Radar offered a major advantage, but early war American crews often struggled to use it effectively. Information overload, poor communication, nervous commanders, and weak nighttime coordination frequently erased the technological edge. The Japanese, meanwhile, relied on years of rigorous training and carefully refined doctrine. But the balance would not remain this way forever. The Allies possessed something Japan could never fully match: the ability to adapt on a massive scale. The United States Navy in particular proved remarkably capable of learning from failure. The painful lessons of Guadalcanal were studied relentlessly. Reports were rewritten. Tactics changed. Radar operators gained greater authority. Communications improved. Destroyer doctrine evolved. Training increasingly emphasized coordinated radar-directed night attacks. At the same time, Allied industry began producing far more advanced radar systems in enormous numbers. By 1943 and 1944, radar technology had improved dramatically. New sets could detect ships at greater distances with far better reliability. More importantly, commanders increasingly learned to trust electronic targeting instead of waiting for visual confirmation. That shift changed naval warfare forever. One of the clearest examples came during the Battle of Cape St. George in November 1943. An American destroyer squadron under Captain Arleigh Burke intercepted Japanese destroyers near New Ireland. But unlike the confused clashes of 1942, this battle unfolded very differently. American radar tracked the Japanese force before visual contact. American destroyers maneuvered aggressively while remaining undetected. Torpedoes and gunfire were coordinated with precision. Several Japanese destroyers were sunk. The Americans suffered no losses. Losses among experienced crews became catastrophic. The Imperial Japanese Navy had entered the war with some of the finest night-fighting sailors in the world. But Guadalcanal and the brutal campaigns that followed consumed these veterans faster than Japan could replace them. The Japanese Navy had once dominated the darkness. Now the darkness belonged to radar. Yet it would be unfair to dismiss the achievements of Japanese night-fighting doctrine simply because it was eventually overcome. For a crucial period early in the Pacific War, the Imperial Japanese Navy possessed perhaps the most effective nighttime surface warfare capability on Earth. Its destroyer crews, cruiser commanders, torpedo doctrine, and training methods inflicted severe losses on Allied fleets. Even American officers later admitted how dangerous and skilled their opponents had been. Admiral Arleigh Burke himself deeply respected Japanese destroyer tactics. Many Allied sailors who fought in the Solomons never forgot the fear of nighttime engagements against Japanese forces. Because those battles were uniquely terrifying. Unlike carrier warfare, where destruction often came from distant aircraft, night surface combat placed ships close enough to see each other burning. Sailors heard shells screaming overhead. Torpedoes struck without warning. Searchlights illuminated shattered ships wrapped in smoke and fire. Entire engagements sometimes lasted less than an hour. And during those early years of the Pacific War, the Japanese often seemed masters of controlled chaos. But war is rarely decided by mastering one form of combat alone. The Allies survived the early disasters, adapted faster, improved technology, and leveraged industrial power on a scale Japan could not match. What began as Japanese superiority in night fighting gradually turned into Allied dominance through radar, doctrine, and experience. Japan entered the conflict exceptionally prepared for the opening battles. Its sailors were experienced. Its doctrine was refined. Its weapons were deadly. But the United States and Britain learned. The darkness that once protected Japanese warships no longer concealed them. By 1945, the night belonged to radar screens, plotting rooms, and fleets linked together by technology that darkness could no longer hide from. But for a brief and deadly period in the Pacific, when the waters around Guadalcanal burned beneath starless skies, the Imperial Japanese Navy turned darkness itself into a weapon. From the gun decks to the bridge, every story we tell honors those who served. If this tale made you feel the salt and steel of history, give it a like, and if you're not yet part of our channel's convoy, subscribe and join the ranks. More powerful stories await.